So, hey guys, today we're going to be talking about just some theory crafting in Yu-Gi-Oh! So, what I mean by that is, well, I think it's an important skill to develop. So, for example, with Vanquish Soul, if you go ahead and analyze the cards real quick, you'll notice that, well, it's actually very difficult to get a Vanquish Soul monster onto the field to begin with. So if we were to, like, this list is honestly, it could be a little bit more intense in the amount of, like, I guess ways we have into Rasen, but already we have, simply put, we have Rasen itself, Stake Your Soul, plus a Fire in Hand, or a Dark would be somewhat alright because we can get into Mad Love or Heavy Borger, depending on what we want exactly. And this will allow us to draw a card, right? Continuously until we hopefully draw into a Rosin. But basic idea, we also have Rosin, so that's 3, 4, 7, and then this is 9. So we have kind of 9 copies of Rosin in our hand, or 9 ways into Rosin. So, alright. If we were to look at this hand, for example, in terms of the Vanquish Soul cards, we have Continue, which only works on Vanquish Soul monsters in your graveyard. So Xiaolong, we can't even get this on the field. So technically, we do have 2 fires aside from Xiaolong if we do like Special Summon Fenrir and Rise Heart. So we have Rise Heart plus Ash Blossom Joy Spring. So we could search any monster we want with Xiaolong, which, funnily enough, Xiaolong is a card that we could tribute summon over Fenrir. Yeah, Fenrir. Because it's only level 5. But with like Caesar Valius or Heavy Borger, we wouldn't be able to actually normal summon over Fenrir. So what I'm trying to get at here is the normal summon is actually the weakest part of Vanquish Soul. So for example, if we normal summon Rasen and we have a Xiaolong in hand, you can't special summon the Xiaolong using the Rasen because you can only use one effect per chain, and it has to specifically be a reveal effect to trigger Xiaolong to special summon itself. So Vanquish Soul Rasen would not be doing anything here aside from searching a card. But after it searches a card, we can't go into like Rock of the Vanquisher. We cannot activate Xiaolong. And technically, Heavy Borger and Caesar Valius cannot be summoned either because they require a Vanquish Soul monster you control to be returned to the hand. So if there isn't one on the field, there's nothing to return. So if we look at the order, return to the hand, and if you do, so it must be returned. Special summon this card from your hand. So the biggest weakness that we have here is going to be non-targeting removal. So if we're up against non-targeting removal, it's literally an impossible situation. So let's say we go normal summon Rasen, and they allow that, or they respond directly to this. So we'll go with a non-target banish, so like Mirror Jade. Then we have a Rasen effect, Chainlink 1, let's say, and then we'll go maybe Chainlink 2, Caesar Valius. Banish effect will be Chainlink 3, it'll banish Rasen. Rasen does not have the ability to get back onto the board. Not really, right? Because for you to special summon this, you would need to link off a different Vanquish Soul monster for Rock to then return Rasen to the hand from the graveyard, or special summon it from the hand, whichever you're going for. You'll do that later, but that's not actually possible because you don't have a monster on the field. So the only thing that can, the only 2 cards really, or the only 2 ways you have to put a Vanquish Soul monster on the field for the most part, I'm going to say, is just you can special summon Pantera, or you can normal summon Rasen. Aside from that, you would need exactly Stake Your Soul and then the right attribute in hand to special summon that monster from the deck. But this isn't searchable or anything, and neither is Pantera necessarily. So Yeah, that's rough. And of course, if we were to chain link one Mirror Jade, there's no response you can do to that either. So regardless, like you lose your one body and you cannot dodge a non-targeted removal. So basically, you get cooked. That's what Vanquish Soul does to you. It's just an impossible situation, really. So yeah, if now that we know this, we can actually just take a look at any deck with non-targeting removal and say in general that that matchup going second, even if your opponent kind of misplays and does the removal in response to your cards before you activate like Borger or Caesar Valius. So that'd be like the idea where if you actually have infinite impermanence, you would think that infinite impermanence does not counter Vanquish Soul if you open like Heavy Borger, but actually that doesn't help at all. And by help at all, I mean Heavy Borger, right? So we have ideas of like normal Sun Rosin, and then you imperm here, Borger tag out for Rosin Rat, and then if we do Xiaolong effect, and you try to imperm that, same deal, we can just Borger tag out the Xiaolong. But you know, Xiaolong does require you to have like 2 fires in hand, and usually the rosin you use to add it will be one of them. So in this case, we will have 2 fires in hand, right? So we can have in our hand here, in this hand, it'll be Rise Heart plus Vanquish Soul Rosin. And then we can do like Rosin adds Xiaolong, reveal Xiaolong, special summon Xiaolong, link off for Rocka the Vanquisher. Rock adds back Rosin. So if we were to imperm this and prevent you from adding Rosin, then this prevents a lot of things actually. So here in this case, you won't be able to special summon Rosin on the next turn because that's when you'll have to more or less add the Rosin. And then with the Xiaolong, has nothing to add, and the only thing Xiaolong can do with 1 fire in hand is change battle position. So in this specific hand, we at least still have like, I guess, Ghost Spell plus a Fenrir. So that'd be something. But yeah. If you know the theory behind the deck, well, you can either play it better or you can take it down easier. Well, in this case, like if we automatically see any non-targeting monster removal, we already know going second it's basically just a lost cause. So for example, this has nothing to do with like I guess the a lot of things that you typically care about Malice, but yeah, MTP 07 has an effect right here where if you control a Malice Link monster, you banish 1 card on the field. So that doesn't say target, so it's non-targeting. So normal summon Rosin, chain MTP 07. Now, if you do not have Ash Blossom Joy Spring to stop the MTP 07, you're cooked. And then there's also the idea of just having Heart Scripter, because if you have the Heart Scripter, you can just banish the card, and yeah, you're cooked. Even if you were to tag out for Borger, as I'm taking the time to summon Heart Scripter, you still won't be able to get into Rocket the Vanquisher because you need technically kind of priority to special summon Rock of the Vanquisher, right? So even if you did have Ash for this, there's a second piece of non-targeting removal right here, which can then target the Rosin. And then there is also the idea of how this is actually less hand trap resistant than a lot of decks, so we're not going to compare with like directly Malice. Like we shouldn't do that because Malice is going to be more hand trap resistant for a billion other reasons, but here's one reason, right? So if you think about actual starters that can actually full combo here, in terms of your main deck monsters, like you have Dormouse and then you have White Rabbit, right? If you disregard Gold Sark and Underground, because technically those are in one way, shape, or form extra copies of like Dormouse or White Rabbit. So that's like the idea of always using emergency teleport to go into a certain card. So if you just hit that card specifically, it's still kind of a choke point. So for example, if we had copies of Stake Your Soul, Durendal, Reinforcement out of the Army, and Razan itself, they're all the same card, essentially. So if we normal summon Razan, that will be negated by, like, let's say a single imperm. If our opponent has the second imperm, then they can use it for, I guess, Rocket the Vanquisher. But aside from that, if our hand contains like these cards, it's more or less just extra copies of Razan, which, you already use Razan's one relevant effect, or you attempted to use it. The effect of you can add one non-warrior Vanquish Soul monster from your deck to your hand. Well, if you attempt to do that, then you don't really have anything else you can do with Razan, even if you have multiple copies, which is why this feels a lot worse to play than a lot of other decks, where they might have multiple starters or multiple cards that can go into their other cards. So for example, with Unchained, you actually have like an archetype Rhoda, but here with Vanquish Soul, we're playing, in this list at least, we're playing pretty much 3 copies of just Rhoda that gets us into either Razan or Rysart. But Rysart doesn't do anything in this deck aside for being an attribute or allowing us to make a rank 4, which would be Baguska, except it got banned. So yeah, no more Baguska. So that's kind of where that went. And then the rest of the extra deck is kind of always just nonsense after a certain point. Aside from the 3 Rocket the Vanquisher. That's kind of how this deck functions, I suppose. So yeah, Vanquish Soul is kind of just full of just some nonsense, I guess. That's one way to put it. We would have an easier time accessing the Kashtira stuff if we had like one additional Fenrir though, because we could do like Fenrir add Rysart special, Rysart banish Fenrir, and then we'd have levels 7, 7, 7, like that. Right now, I think we could do 2 7s, 3 7s is but a bit much. So yeah, but yeah, there are a lot of weaknesses and flaws that you can look at this conceptually, and you don't actually need any data for. It's just kind of logical thinking, I guess. And you can do this for a lot of different decks. Like, for example, Maliss is kind of funny in one sense. So with the Maliss cards, they actually don't like to be banished by your opponent, because you need to banish your own Maliss cards for your combo in general. So for example, we have Maliss and the Mirror, which banishes a card right here. And then if you do banish, you get a search. And then we have the traps here, which banish a Maliss monster. So normally, let's say we do normal summon White Rabbit, and then we banish it for, let's say, TB11. Then you would do special summon back White Rabbit, and then you can special summon, let's say, Dormouse, make a link to, let's go with Lizard Haggardos. Haggardos banishes Dormouse, Dormouse special summons itself. Then you could go into, I guess, like White Binder. Sure, right? But as of currently, if you were to attempt to do this, right? But on normal summon of White Rabbit instead, I will banish White Rabbit. Then when you do TB11, it will banish White Rabbit and it will not come back because you already used that effect. Then you just have a lone whichever Maliss monster you decide to special summon sitting on the field doing absolutely nothing. And of course, you need at least 2 bodies to kind of start the play. And if we start with like Dormouse, like normal summon Dormouse, that's going to be pretty much the same, right? So this would be normal summon Dormouse, and then if you specifically banish White Rabbit, this is going to be a little bit better, because White Rabbit will still get to like set a card. But if we were to like negate banish White Rabbit, then you have absolutely nothing. But a lot of the time, people will grab GWC 06, for the combo. So if we just banish White Rabbit has actually already been banished here. So this doesn't fully stop the combo because Dormouse is just a better starter, I guess. But if we banish the White Rabbit doesn't come back, so you would have to GWC to banish the Dormouse and special summon the White Rabbit, and then Dormouse can special summon itself. If you didn't actually banish, uh, uh, I guess the Dormouse with Maliss and Underground or Goldsark first. But as of right now, or even like before, honestly, you had more copies of Maliss and Underground and Goldsark than you did of Dormouse. So technically, most of the time you would be banishing Dormouse and then having Dormouse special summon itself. So you could banish Dormouse, and then Dormouse would not be able to special summon itself back, and it would not be able to activate its effect either, because it's an ignition effect. So just in general here, removal was going to be pretty solid against Maliss as long as you're going first. Just any form of removal versus the Dormouse is going to be solid. The only thing that would suck is if specifically your opponent had like March Hare to banish the Dormouse. Aside from that, there wasn't much to worry about. So like even if we had MTP07, GWC06 set, like any of these card set, well, Dormouse already got banished, so if you banish it for more or less cost for these cards, it doesn't actually do anything. GWC06, for example, is not actually activatable because you do not have a Maliss monster in your graveyard or that is banished, so you have nothing to summon off of GWC06, and then you'll have nothing to banish when this leaves the field, right? So there's some nuance to things here. Like this is just matchup specific. If we go into like deck building stuff as well, we can go ahead and like take a look at this list. This list specifically was built at a time where I needed more background removal. So I balanced it out a little bit where we have one copy of Duster and then we have the 2 copies of Red Reboot here. And these cards specifically are really good against like trap decks. And then we have Evenly Matched to kind of like blend it a little bit better because we're not going to just be playing against necessarily only trap decks. So if I'm against just like a regular deck, I guess, like let's say we'll go with, I don't know, Maliss or Izeal type deal, Evenly Matched will still be fairly solid against those lists. And I'll be able to use Evenly Matched for going second in those cases. And I mean, this is already pushing it a bit because we're running, I feel like, too many spell traps in Vanquish Soul with this list because we want more monsters for attributes, typically. But this is very spell trap heavy here. Well, there is the fact that this technically, like, this whole row kind of goes into monsters, so it's not as bad. But they're also kind of chokes because you can like Ash Rhoda, which is worse than Rosin getting Ash because we can still like link off Rosin and then summon it on a later turn. Whereas with Rhoda, we just don't have access to Rosin to begin with if this gets Ashed. So that's kind of terrible in that regard. It gets like fairly complicated when we have Rhoda plus Rosin, and then this is kind of acting as bait. Yeah. The theory crafting in deck building as well is something that is important to be kind of aware of. So if you know like just some general things about deck building, it becomes it becomes easier to kind of like deck build efficiently just from the get-go, so you don't have to spend as much time optimizing. So for example, I guess well, if you care about Maxx C, you should always be thinking about like, what does my deck do against Maxx C? So for example, if I have Vanquish Soul here, I mean, we just do normal summon Rosin, and then we special summon Rocka the Vanquisher, and that could be all we're doing. Basically, an upstart, just giving our opponent a draw off of Rock. There is potentially that idea, I guess. And then next turn, we'll go hard with the special summoning. And we also have ideas of just putting in Ash Blossom Dry Spring in the main deck, called by the Grave. Draw and Lock, but not in this deck because we actually need to do searches pretty bad in this deck, so we don't want to ever draw ourselves. So we would rather give our opponent the draw, or I guess in this case, the draws, than having to draw ourselves. But then we also need to know kind of the math on Maxx C as well. So for example, our opponent has a 20% chance to open a Maxx C more or less. And we have in this particular list, at least, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different cards here for Maxx C. So that will be around a 40% chance for our opponent to have a Maxx C for us. Or no, I mean for us to have a counter to Maxx C and 20% for them to have a Maxx C. So for fun, we'll just round up and say there is going to be a 10% chance for Maxx C to resolve, just to make this easier to math, I guess. It's actually probably more like 6%, I think, but or for it to resolve or something. What was it? No, it's not. It's like 12% chance to resolve, not 10. Yeah, whatever the case, it's still around 10%. So if we account for that, and then we account for going first or going second. If we're going second, maybe like we'll say 5% of the time we're going first or going second or whatever, Maxx C will be resolving. So if you do that calculation once and you just remember this, you know, you never have to really worry about that again. But in this case, the math is a little off because I think those numbers are from when called by was at 2. So yeah, I mean, it would have been a 50% chance to open like a counter to Maxx C more or less. So 10% odds of your opponent being able to resolve it at 2 copies. If we increase the copies of Maxx C, it goes up to 15% from 10%. And that's just like in all games, but in games where you're specifically going to be going first, it's going to be less, kind of, right? Well, over the course of all your games, I think, right? So, something like that. So just knowing the theory for that, and knowing that in some cases, like for example, in let's say Kashtira, you actually have the idea to immediately go into a Rise Art super fast and only giving up like 2 draws. So since you always have this like really good line for whenever your opponent attempts to Maxx C you, you can just ignore kind of Maxx C, and you could actually cut Ash Blossom Joy Spring in like Kashtira, and also Called by the Grave, opening up your deck space for just something else in general. That's actually pretty cool, I guess. And for Flaundries, you can also kind of cut at least the Ash Blossom. I think you still want to keep the Called by in Flu, but yeah, you can cut Ash Blossom because, yeah, I mean, Maxx C, it doesn't do anything because you don't special summon. So, you know, that's just a little bit of optimization knowledge. And of course, like, you can get some decent matchup knowledge just by knowing the theory behind certain decks. So, you know, like, let's go with a different example, I guess. What is a good deck? Let's say we have, let's go with Maliss. So you have Maliss. Let's assume it's like full power Maliss, just to be clear that we're talking about. If we have Maliss and our opponent is on Kashtira, this matchup is basically just depending on who is going first, and whoever goes first is just going to win this matchup. So with the Kashtira cards, we already kind of discussed how the Maliss monsters, they just don't like being banished, so being under a macro is purely disadvantageous. So whenever I'm playing against a Maliss player and then they just drop like a macro or a fissure type floodgate shifter, that type of deal, they usually lose. Because this deck is actually, you know, it's just somehow terrible under macro. So yeah, you just end up losing a lot. And yeah, if we have Kashtira, your effects are not trigger effects. So at the very least, if we're accounting for just pure Maliss, you have two forms of removal. So if I have any less than 3 starters in hand, I cannot play. So let's assume we have just Kashtira Unicorn plus copies of Raids off before accounting for hand traps, right? Which they will draw 4 if they're allowed to go first, and we cannot stop their combo with our hand traps, which we could have a slight edge on them if we had 3 copies of Shifter, which we do not, but yeah. So special summon Unicorn. Unicorn gets banished immediately. Activate Raids off, attempt to add Unicorn. Banished immediately. Special summon second Unicorn. It could, well, it can't be banished immediately anymore, but that's the starting line for when we can actually start playing. Aside from that, I guess we could technically use Birth to special summon back Unicorn as well, and then attempt to activate, I guess, Unicorn to add Theosis. And if our opponent is smart in this case, they would allow the Unicorn to resolve after we've used Birth, so they can kind of like bait out Theosis. So you can attempt Theosis, and then Unicorn just gets bashed in this case because you're really mostly worried about Birth to begin with, I think. Not so much the Theosis, because you can just chain removal to Theosis. Or I guess with Birth, you could just banish Birth as well, which is fine, I suppose. Like, Unicorn resolves, add Birth, banish Birth, just get rid of Unicorn somehow next turn. But you are worried about Unicorn a little bit because it can mess with your extra deck and make it very difficult for you to OTK. For example, we could banish like access code plus, well, now you have even less Maliss cards in your extra deck if we're not looking at full power. Kinda, but you're typically running an extra deck as one of, so we can banish Heart Scripter plus access code. So that'd be 1 on our turn, 1 bash on our turn, 1 on our opponent's turn, and then that banishes 2 cards overall, right? And then maybe we don't get OTK'd and we have another chance to maybe try to use Kashtira Birth to get into combo. Maybe. I don't think it's like that likely, but there's pretty much, yeah, that's all you're hoping for. So it gets pretty complicated in some matchups, but yeah, without even playing against a deck, like, let's see what we have. I mean, if I know what the deck does, I can figure it out. So we have Orcust, and we have, let's say, Maliss. I have never seen this matchup in my life, but let's see if I can figure out how this matchup goes. So, okay. We have Whitebinder, which can banish 3 different cards in the graveyard, which sounds really good against Orcust, but here is the issue. It's not like a big issue, so this is good, but, well, if we're going first, we're never going to allow you to go into Whitebinder, and also all of our cards will be quick effects if we went first, so this banish won't really be able to banish any of the relevant like Orcust cards, because we can just use their effects in chain to the attempted banish. But then if we're going second into this, it's also not that great, because, well, you're able to circumvent this in 2 ways. So you have the Link 1, which is kind of new, right? So the Link 1, we can technically use that to grab Babel and then start doing our plays regarding, or not regarding, involving our Orcust main deck monsters to kind of start cycling through those guys and then climbing into our extra deck cards. So we have that idea. And then aside from that, well, why would we have multiple guys in the graveyard? It's typically only going to be like 1 guy. So if we have Harp Horror, why would we also have like Orcust Nightmare in the graveyard? That makes literally no sense, right? There's no world where we would have 3 guys for you to banish at the same time, because we would banish the first guy, so in this case, like, or to special summon Girsu and then send like Nightmare or something. If you banish Nightmare, I guess I can just send a second Nightmare or send the target for the Nightmare. In this case, World Legacy, World 1. and then we can continue our combo off from that point. And then there is the idea that we have non-targeting removal, which isn't particularly super useful, except for the fact that we can get rid of the back row if necessary. Maliss and Underground we can't really do much about. Crescendo is good because we can just banish the Dormouse. So for example, we have, well, it doesn't matter in which way we do it. So if you normal summon Dormouse or you Underground for Dormouse, we allow Dormouse to be summoned if you do attempt to summon Dormouse this way. Because, well, either way, let's go through both scenarios. Special summon Dormouse, Dormouse effect. Enchain to Dormouse, banish. You cannot respond to this. So we'll banish Dormouse. And then Dormouse, since it's already been banished once and used that special summon effect, now it's just going to stay banished. And then we have no effect to banish a Maliss monster from the deck. Then option 2, you banish the Dormouse with the Crescendo. It special summons itself back, but yeah, I already used its effect, so it's just going to be a single kind of body. Not much different from if you were to normal summon Ash Blossom Joe Spring and link this off for Almirage. That's the equivalent of what happened to that Dormouse, I guess. So that's fine. In comparison, I guess it's going to be potentially worse for, I think, Orchest, because we have, well, if we're going first, we're always going to be doing better, but going second tools, let's see, do we have anything? No, I don't. Well, actually, maybe. There are a lot of engines that you could run with Orchest, because Orchest is like moderately efficient to play with other lists, because you just need Harp in Graveyard or Nightmare in Graveyard in case you go into Orchest, or no, Nightmare Mermaid. To go into Orchest Nightmare, that's like full Orchest kind of combo. So if you were playing like, I don't know, let's say Beansmith, Mitsurugi, Orchest, or whatever, you have a lot of stuff to kind of insulate your Orchest plays. With Maliss, I mean, you are pretty hit right now, but even when you were not hit, I mean, your choke points were a lot more obvious, and you have information a lot faster. So if I were to just activate Engraver, there's no information on what I'm playing, right? But if we were to activate Underground, Goldsark, normal / special summon Dormouse, you immediately know it's Maliss, and you know the choke point immediately. If we see Engraver, it's actually unclear, right? So technically, depending on what kind of engine our opponent's playing with Fiendsmith, they can still go into Moon later, so we might want to hold for I guess if we have Ash Blossom, we might want to hold for the Link one. But in this case, like, Ash Blossom can actually be worse to hold in the event that our opponent is actually on White Forest, because if we go through like the line with Engraver, we have Engraver adds tracked for Lurie, sends Lurie, special summon Lurie, and then from this point, after they link off that Link 1, there'll be a target for Engraver and the Link 1 in the graveyard, which can then attach onto the Engraver, which is going to be considered a spell / trap, right? So in this case, it would be best to immediately ash either the tracked or the Engraver, assuming that the White Forest cards are going to be dead if you were to do it this way, right? But if we were against a deck that has this as their backup plan, hitting it later, the Fiendsmith cards, around like Requiem with an Ash Blossom to prevent like special summon Lacrima, that's going to be more ideal, because just your opponent's special summoning Engraver is not going to be as big of a deal, because they would need like Engraver plus an additional monster to then go into, like, in the case of Orchest, it would be Mermaid for Nightmare. For like Tearlament, they would need an additional body for a sequence, and it's not going to be nearly as bad. And they don't have the option to really use like Fiendsmith after this point. Uh, yeah, I mean that's kind of the general idea, I guess. And then there's also, of course, the concern of Engraver being removal and trading off for one of your negates. So if you allow a Light Fiend to hit the graveyard, aside from Engraver itself, there's the idea that Engraver can use its effect to send one of your monsters to the graveyard if they're allowed to get um, a Link 1 and whatnot, right? So a lot of things to kind of consider here. But, you know, as always, I guess it kind of does depend on like a lot of different factors and what your own deck would be capable of, I suppose. So basically, though, with Maliss and Orcus matchup, I think it's just pretty neutral. You know, it's normal, and there's not much of anything that's super exciting, except for I guess like with Enlil Girsu, you could take a card non-targeting with this effect, and if this is sent to the graveyard, this can send one card on the field to the graveyard non-targeting as well, which is moderately useful. But yeah, you do have like 3 different forms of removal plus Omni Negate. So it's pretty difficult to beat, I guess, like just Orcus in general. So we have Snatch Steal. So let's say you special summon Dormouse or whatever. I'll just take the Dormouse. Or I can take your Link 2, take your Link 3, whichever one. We have Omni Negate as well. We have idea of special summon Girsu for removal as well. Then we have send this to the graveyard, which there are ways you could definitely do that, right? And then that's another form of removal. So that's going to be 4 with just like pure Orcus. If you have the idea to IP and then convert Enlil Girsu into SP to get this off the field, then that's going to be 2 additional forms of removal, putting us at, well, we'll say like 6 if we have like Orcus Endboard plus IP, which I think is fairly reasonable to do. So yeah, 6 forms of interruption, I guess. Of which like Maliss could die through just consistency issues at the moment. But even before, well, yeah, you have chokes that you can't do anything about. So yeah, I mean, you would get pretty cooked, I guess. So I think one of the things, if I were to be playing this very tryhard, I would think to ignore maybe Dormouse. I might care a little bit about the White Rabbit, so I might enchain to White Rabbit, special summoning. I would consider probably summoning like Dingirsu to use removal, and then I'll remove maybe the trap. Maybe I'll remove one of these guys. Kind of depends. And I don't really want to see Link Decoder on the field. That's annoying because it can chain block stuff. So do I even allow, would I even allow you to go into Red Ransom? I mean, how many starters and extenders do you realistically have? After a certain point, even if you had like 20 cards in hand, only so many of your cards actually do things, so we can prevent it, right? This has 1 ability to special summon, so that's like 1, 2, 3. And then the special summons itself, plus like another monster, so that's like generously 5, because you do have a normal summon or whatever you're banishing with the March Air. So you don't have to special summon all of these guys, technically. So if we have 5 forms of removal, that covers every single Maliss card, but now that you have backup secretary and such, I guess we should save some in case you're able to kind of access the extra deck a little bit. So we're looking at probably, if we want to be really on the safe side, and we have enough interruptions to spare, then we can hit like White Rabbit with Crescendo, probably. And then if they start trying to go into the extra deck monsters, we can strategically just snipe the extra deck monsters they're going into, like Link Decoder and such. So yeah, that's about it, right? But then on the flip side, they're just trying to banish our relevant Orcus cards whenever they can, and then you have ideas of just removing my guys off the field. Yeah, just like normally. Nothing like super exciting. The Galatea 1 you would probably want to banish because it has the effect to special summon itself from the graveyard, so no point in letting your opponent link it off themselves, so probably hit that. And then Nightmare Mermaid requires you to go into another Nightmare monster first, so you're not like too worried about that. So if I were to link off two guys to go into Nightmare Phoenix, for example, and then threaten to go Mermaid, you can just banish the Phoenix. And then if I were to want to go into Nightmare Mermaid again, or attempt to do so, I would need to link off another two monsters and then go into Mermaid, discarding a card. So yeah, that's some theory crafting for you right there. And I haven't really played either decks, but I know how they function, so you know, there's that. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.